My name is Samuel, and at 33, I've built a career as a financial advisor through years of discipline and hard work. After saving diligently for a decade, I had $40,000 set aside to launch my own investment firm. Then I came home for our family gathering last weekend. I noticed something odd. My bedroom safe stood open completely empty. My mother has always favored my younger brother Kevin, but this time she crossed an unforgivable line. Before I continue this story, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, and hit that like and subscribe button if family betrayal stories make your blood boil like mine. I grew up in a middle-class neighborhood in Allentown, Pennsylvania, in a modest two-story house with faded blue siding that my father repainted every few summers. Dad was the hardest working man I ever knew. He managed a manufacturing plant working 60-hour weeks so we could have opportunities he never had. Every night, he'd come home exhausted, his hands rough with calluses, but he always made time to help with my math homework or toss a baseball in the backyard. When I turned 18, right after my high school graduation, he suffered a massive heart attack at work. The doctor said he was gone before he hit the floor. Our family was never the same after that. My father had been our emotional and financial foundation. Without him, everything seemed to crack and shift like a house settling on unstable ground. I still remember the funeral, standing beside my mother and 15-year-old brother Kevin as they lowered the casket, feeling like I needed to be the man of the house now, but having no idea what that actually meant. My mother, Margaret, took Dad's death particularly hard. They'd been high school sweethearts, married for 25 years. I think something inside her broke when he died, and she channeled all her grief and love toward Kevin, as if protecting him became her sole purpose. I understand grief does strange things to people, but the pattern was established long before Dad's death. Kevin had always been her favorite, the baby of the family, the one who needed extra attention, extra chances, extra everything. After Dad died, there was only one adult who seemed to see me as more than just the responsible one who could take care of himself. My father's older brother, Uncle James, stepped in and became my mentor. He owned a successful regional investment firm and had always appreciated my interest in finance and business. While Mom focused on making sure Kevin got through high school, Uncle James helped me figure out college applications and scholarships. "Your father was proud of your work ethic," he told me one night after helping me fill out financial aid forms. "He knew you'd go far because you never take shortcuts." Those words became my North Star during the difficult years that followed. The months after Dad's death revealed how unprepared our family was financially. He'd had some life insurance, but not nearly enough. Mom had never worked outside the home, and suddenly needed to find a job with an outdated resume and no recent experience. The life insurance money wouldn't last long with a mortgage and Kevin's upcoming college expenses. I made a decision that would set the course for my future. I would put myself through college without burdening my mother. I worked 3 jobs: that first year, morning shifts at a local bakery, evening shifts at the campus library, and weekend lawn care for a dozen neighborhood clients. I lived in the cheapest off-campus housing I could find, ate ramen more often than I care to remember, and still managed to maintain a 3.8 GPA in my finance classes. While other students partied on weekends, I was calculating interest rates and studying investment strategies. Uncle James noticed my dedication. During my sophomore year, he offered me an internship at his firm during winter and summer breaks. I soaked up everything I could: client relations, market analysis, portfolio management. The older advisors in the firm joked that I was James's shadow, always one step behind him, with a notebook in hand. "The best investment advice I can give you," Uncle James said during one of our mentoring sessions, "is to be the person others trust with their money. That means integrity in everything, even when no one's watching." By my senior year, I had job offers from 3 different investment firms. I chose Meridian Financial because they offered the strongest mentorship program and clear advancement tracks. Within 5 years, I had built a client list that included doctors, small business owners, and even a few local celebrities. My reputation for careful, ethical investment strategies opened doors. Meanwhile, Kevin's path couldn't have been more different. Mom convinced him to enroll at Penn State, using most of Dad's remaining life insurance money for his tuition. He lasted 1 semester before dropping out, claiming college wasn't his thing. He moved back home and cycled through a series of retail jobs, never lasting more than a few months at any of them. When Kevin turned 21, He convinced Mom to co-sign on a loan so he could open a smartphone repair shop. I warned her against it, pointing out that Kevin had no business experience and a spotty work history. She accused me of being jealous of my brother's entrepreneurial spirit. "Your brother just needs someone to believe in him," she said, her voice tight with disappointment in me. "Your father would have supported him." I knew that wasn't true. Dad had always emphasized earning trust through actions, not words. But I backed off. The business failed within 6 months, leaving Mom responsible for a $25,000 loan that Kevin had somehow already spent. This pattern repeated over the years with depressing regularity. Kevin would come up with a new venture, or opportunity, that required just a little financial help. Mom would drain her savings or take out a loan. The venture would collapse, and Kevin would have 1,000 excuses why it wasn't his fault. Each time I tried to stay out of it, focusing instead on building my own financial security. 2 years ago, when I was 31, Uncle James approached me with a proposal that showed just how much trust he had in my financial acumen. "I've got $40,000 I'd like you to invest for me," he said over lunch at our regular diner. "It's part of my retirement fund, but I think you could get better returns than my current advisor." I was deeply honored but also concerned. "That's a significant amount of money, Uncle James. Are you sure you want me handling it, instead of your regular financial team?" He slid a folder across the table. "I've watched you build your career the right way, Samuel. No shortcuts, no ethical gray areas. This is as much a vote of confidence as it is a business arrangement." We signed proper legal paperwork, making it clear this wasn't just a family favor but a professional arrangement. I was now the custodian of his investment fund with specific responsibilities and obligations. I took this trust incredibly seriously, researching opportunities thoroughly before making any moves with his money. Over the next 18 months, I grew his $40,000 to nearly $47,000, a modest but solid return in a volatile market. Each quarter I sent him detailed reports just as I would for any client. The arrangement worked perfectly, strengthening both our personal and professional relationship. What I didn't realize was that this trust would soon become the flashpoint for the biggest family crisis of my adult life. Last week marked 5 years since Dad's death, and as had become our tradition, Mom organized a family gathering at the old house. These annual reunions were always awkward affairs for me, forced conversations with distant relatives who asked the same questions about my job and relationship status, Kevin, dominating conversations with exaggerated stories of his latest ventures, and Mom hovering around him like he was still 15 years old. I arrived Friday evening, after a 3-hour drive from Philadelphia, where I now lived. The house looked exactly as it always did, the same faded blue siding that no one had repainted since Dad died, the same cracked concrete path leading to the front door, the same brass knocker that had lost its shine years ago. Walking in felt like stepping back in time, except the photos on the walls now included graduations and weddings of cousins I barely kept in touch with. Mom greeted me with unusual enthusiasm at the door. "Samuel, I'm so glad you made it," she exclaimed, embracing me tightly. This warm welcome immediately put me on edge. Our relationship had been cordial but distant for years, with perfunctory phone calls on birthdays and holidays. This effusive greeting felt performative, especially when she added, "Kevin's been asking when you'd arrive." That was another red flag. Kevin and I maintained a superficial relationship, at best exchanging generic Christmas cards and occasionally liking each other's social media posts. We weren't enemies, just strangers who happened to share DNA and childhood memories. Dinner that night was a tense affair. Kevin kept his eyes fixed on his plate, only occasionally glancing up to contribute to the conversation when directly addressed. Mom filled every silence with nervous chatter about neighbors I no longer remembered and relatives whose lives I'd stopped following years ago. The Hendersons finally sold their house. "You remember them, the ones with the yappy little dog? And your cousin Megan is expecting her second child in December. Isn't that wonderful?" I nodded and made appropriate sounds of interest while watching Kevin check his phone under the table every few minutes, his expression growing increasingly anxious. At one point, he excused himself to take a call outside. Through the dining room window, I could see him pacing on the back porch, gesticulating frantically as he spoke. When he returned, his face was pale, and he avoided eye contact with everyone. Mom immediately launched into another story about the church bake sale. But I noticed her eyes darting to Kevin with concern. After dinner, I excused myself to go upstairs to my old bedroom, which Mom had preserved in a weird time capsule of my high school years, sports trophies, academic awards, and faded posters still adorning the walls. I needed to retrieve some documents from my safe quarterly investment reports for Uncle James that I planned to review before our lunch meeting the next day. I kept a small fireproof safe bolted to the floor in my closet installed years ago when I still lived at home. Mom had always respected my privacy and to my knowledge had never attempted to access it. I kept a spare key hidden behind a loose baseboard in the closet, a hiding place only I knew about. Or so I thought. When I entered my bedroom and opened the closet door, I immediately noticed something wrong. The safe door was slightly ajar. My heart began to race as I knelt down and pulled it open fully, already knowing what I would find. Nothing. The safe was completely empty. The investment fund documents, the emergency cash I kept on hand, and most importantly, the $40,000 of Uncle James's money that I'd withdrawn the previous day to reinvest in a new opportunity, all gone, along with my personal savings of $15,000. I sat back on my heels, a cold sweat breaking out across my forehead. My mind raced through possibilities, a break-in, but nothing else in the house seemed disturbed. A misunderstanding. No. I specifically remembered placing the money in the safe yesterday before driving to Allentown. Then I checked behind the loose baseboard. The spare key was missing. This wasn't a random theft. This was someone who knew about the safe, knew where I kept the spare key, and knew there would be money inside. The list of people with that knowledge was extremely short. A wave of nausea washed over me as I connected the dots. Mom's unusually warm greeting, Kevin's nervous behavior, the whispered conversations, the frantic phone call. The pieces fell into place with devastating clarity. I found my mother alone in the kitchen, loading the dishwasher with deliberate care, as if the precise arrangement of dinner plates was the most important task in the world. "Mom," I said, my voice calmer than I felt. "I need to talk to you about something important." She didn't turn around, just continued rinsing a glass with focused attention. "Can it wait until morning, Samuel? I'm rather tired." "My safe is empty." The glass slipped from her fingers, clattering in the sink, but miraculously not breaking. Her shoulders stiffened, but she still didn't face me. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said. But her voice had lost its earlier warmth. $55,000 is missing from my safe. The safe only you and I knew about. The safe that was locked yesterday and is now empty. She finally turned around, wiping her hands on a dish towel with deliberate slowness. Her expression shifted from feigned confusion to defensive righteousness. "Kevin needed help," she said, as if that explained everything. "He's in serious trouble." "So you stole from me. You broke into my safe and took money that wasn't even all mine to give." "Don't be so dramatic, Samuel. It's not stealing when it's family." Her voice took on the martyred tone I'd heard countless times before. "Besides, you've always been the successful one. Kevin has struggled all his life. You can afford to help your brother. Did you even consider asking me first?" She laughed, a short, dismissive sound that made my blood boil. "You would have said no. You always say no when it comes to helping Kevin. Because throwing money at his problems has never solved them. It just enables him to create bigger problems." Her face hardened. "I took your $40,000 and paid off your brother's debts. You owe the family that much." She smirked, crossing her arms over her chest like she'd just delivered an irrefutable argument. I felt a strange calm settle over me, then the kind that comes when a situation is so outrageous that ordinary emotional responses seem inadequate. "If you say so," I replied, my voice level. She looked surprised by my apparent capitulation, then relieved. "I knew you'd understand once you thought about it. Family has to stick together." I nodded already, turning to leave the kitchen. "Where's Kevin now?" "In the backyard, I think." "Samuel," she called, as I reached the door, "thank you for understanding. Your father would be proud." That statement, more than anything else, clarified my resolve. My father, who valued honesty and hard work above all else, would never have been proud of this deception. Using his memory to manipulate me was the final straw. I didn't correct her, though. I simply nodded again and went to find my brother already formulating a plan that would bring this family charade crashing down around us. As I stepped into the backyard, the betrayal I felt went beyond the missing money. It was the casual way my mother had violated my boundaries, the entitled assumption that my success was somehow a family resource to be tapped whenever Kevin created a new crisis. Most painfully, it was the invocation of my father's memory to justify actions I knew he would have condemned. The financial loss was significant. $15,000 of my personal savings gone, and worse, $40,000 that wasn't even mine to lose. Uncle James had trusted me with his money-signed legal documents, making me its custodian. This wasn't just a family squabble anymore. It had serious legal implications. I found Kevin pacing near the old oak tree, where Dad had built us a treehouse 25 years ago. The treehouse had rotted and been removed years ago, but the oak remained a silent witness to our family's disintegration. Kevin startled when he saw me, his eyes widening like a cornered animal's. "Hey Sam," he said, attempting casual friendliness that fell completely flat. "Mom told me what happened," I said, keeping my voice neutral. He laughed nervously, running a hand through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of our father that it sent an unexpected pang through my chest. "Look, I know how it seems, but you have to understand. What I understand is that you and Mom stole $55,000 from my safe. What I don't understand is why." Kevin's false bravado crumbled instantly. "I messed up, Sam. I messed up really bad this time." His voice cracked, and for a moment, I saw the scared 15-year-old who'd stood beside me at our father's funeral. "Explain." He sank onto the old wooden bench beneath the tree. "It started with sports betting. Just small bets at first, you know. $10 here, 20 there. I was actually pretty good at it. Made some decent money last football season." I remained standing, unwilling to share the bench with him. "And then I started betting bigger. Found some guys who would extend credit. I had a system, was really confident." He stared at his hands. "But I hit a losing streak. A bad one." "How much?" "I owed nearly $60,000 to some people you don't want to owe money to." Fear flashed across his face, genuine and raw. "They gave me a deadline, pay at least $40,000 by this weekend, or they'd..." He trailed off. "They'd what?" "Let's just say they were very graphic about what would happen to my hands. And then they mentioned they knew where Mom lives." Despite everything, a chill ran through me at the threat to our mother. "So you told her you needed $40,000, and she decided to take it from my safe instead of going to the bank or calling the police?" Kevin looked away. "I didn't know she was going to do that. I swear, Sam. I just told her I was in trouble. She said she'd handle it." "And you didn't question where the money came from when she handed you $40,000 in cash?" "I was desperate," he exclaimed, a flash of the old Kevin. Always the victim of circumstances, never responsible for his choices. "These guys don't mess around. I've seen what they do to people who don't pay. So the money's already gone. You've already given it to these people." He nodded miserably. "This afternoon. They gave me a receipt, if you can believe it. Said I still owe them $20,000, but they'll give me another month." I processed this information silently. The money wasn't sitting in a bank account somewhere that could be easily recovered. It was already in the hands of loan sharks or bookies, people unlikely to return it regardless of the circumstances. "What about the other $15,000? I asked. "Mom took $55,000 total." Kevin looked genuinely confused. "I don't know anything about that. I only got $40,000. That revelation added another layer to my mother's betrayal. She'd taken an additional $15,000, my personal savings, for reasons yet unknown. Before I could question Kevin further, the back door opened, and Mom stepped onto the porch. "Dinner's cleaned up," she announced with forced cheerfulness. "I thought we could play some cards like we used to." The normalcy she was attempting to project was so disconnected from reality that I nearly laughed. Instead, I excused myself and went back inside, needing time to think. In the living room, I found a framed photo of my parents on their 25th wedding anniversary, just months before Dad died. They were smiling, arms around each other, looking toward a future they assumed would unfold together. I wondered what Dad would advise me to do in this situation. Mom followed me inside, apparently deciding that Kevin didn't need her hovering presence for once. "I hope you and your brother had a good talk," she said, straightening cushions on the sofa that didn't need straightening. "We did. He told me about his gambling debts." She stiffened slightly. Your brother has made some mistakes, but he's learning. This situation taught him a valuable lesson. Has it? Because it sounds like he still owes $20,000 to dangerous people. She waved a dismissive hand. We'll figure that out. The important thing is, he's safe for now. And what about me? What about the trust that was violated when you broke into my safe? Oh, Samuel. She sighed as if I were being unreasonable. Sometimes I think all those finance courses squeeze the humanity right out of you. Family helps family. Your father always said that. Dad also said that actions have consequences, and that helping someone avoid consequences isn't actually helping them. Don't you dare use your father's words against me, she snapped, the pleasant mask slipping. I raised you boys alone after he died. I made sacrifices you can't even imagine. Like what exactly? I put my entire life on hold. I could have remarried, you know. Harold Jenkins asked me out 3 times after your father died, but I said no because I needed to focus on you boys. This was news to me, but hardly relevant. And that justifies theft. It wasn't theft. It was redistributing family resources to the child who needed it most. She crossed her arms defensively. You've always had everything come easily to you, Samuel. Good grades, scholarships, that fancy job. Kevin struggles. He's sensitive. He needs more support. I stared at her, truly seeing for the first time how she had rewritten our family history to fit her narrative. In her version, I was the privileged son who sailed through life effortlessly, while Kevin was the disadvantaged one who needed every advantage. The reality, my working 3 jobs, while taking full course loads, Kevin dropping out after 1 semester, despite having his tuition paid in full, didn't fit her story, so she simply ignored it. Dad would be disappointed, I said quietly, knowing it would cut deeper than any accusation. Her face flushed with anger. Don't you dare, your father loved Kevin. He understood him in a way you never have. Dad loved us both, but he believed in earning what you get. He wouldn't have approved of stealing from one son to bail out the other. It's not stealing when a mother redistributes resources between her children, she insisted, her voice rising. Besides, you're doing well. You can easily replace that money. The conversation was going nowhere. Mom had constructed a reality where her actions were not just justified, but virtuous. There would be no getting through to her, at least not until she faced consequences more concrete than my disapproval. Throughout the evening, tension filled the house like smoke, seeping into every interaction. Aunt Lydia, Dad's sister, who had arrived for the family gathering, kept glancing between Mom, Kevin, and me with obvious concern. Uncle Paul, Mom's brother, seemed oblivious to the undercurrents, chatting about golf and his new boat. Kevin remained on edge, checking his phone constantly and startling at every sound from outside. Mom maintained a brittle cheerfulness, refilling drinks with shaking hands and laughing too loudly at Uncle Paul's jokes. Several times, she pulled Kevin aside for whispered conversations that ended abruptly when anyone approached. I maintained a calm exterior, participating in small talk and declining offers of alcohol. I needed a clear head for what was coming, because at 6:30, Uncle James had texted that he was stopping by to discuss the investment opportunity I'd mentioned, the very reason I'd withdrawn his $40,000 in the first place. As 9 o'clock approached, headlights swept across the living room as a car pulled into the driveway. Mom froze mid-sentence in her conversation with Aunt Lydia, her eyes darting to the window, then to me. Are you expecting someone? She asked, her voice unnaturally high. Uncle James mentioned he might stop by. I said casually, watching the color drain from her face. The doorbell rang, and in that moment I saw something I'd never seen before in my mother's eyes: fear. The doorbell's chime echoed through the suddenly silent house. Mom's hand flew to her throat, her eyes wide with panic, as she looked from me to Kevin, who had gone completely pale. I'll get it, I said, rising from my seat with deliberate calmness. Wait, Mom, said, reaching out, as if to physically stop me. Samuel, we should talk before. Before what? Mom? Before Uncle James asks about his $40,000. The money you took from my safe. Aunt Lydia gasped softly, while Uncle Paul set down his drink with a thunk, confusion written across his face. The doorbell rang again, more insistently this time. I walked to the front door, aware of Mom hurrying behind me. Opening it revealed Uncle James, his tall frame silhouetted against the porch light, briefcase in hand, and a friendly smile on his face that didn't quite reach his shrewd eyes. "Samuel," he greeted me warmly, stepping inside and clapping me on the shoulder. "Good to see you." "Margaret, you're looking well," he added, nodding to my mother, who managed a weak smile in return. Uncle James had always maintained a cordial relationship with my mother after Dad died, though I suspected he had his own opinions about her parenting choices. As Dad's older brother, he shared many of the same principles: hard work, personal responsibility, and consequences for one's actions. "James, what a surprise," Mom said, her voice strained. "We were just having a little family gathering. Can I get you something to drink?" "No thank you, Margaret. This is just a quick business stop. Samuel mentioned a promising new investment opportunity, and I thought I'd drop by to discuss the details." He turned to me. "Do you have the prospectus?" "Actually, Uncle James, there's been a complication," I began, as we moved into the living room, where the rest of the family sat in uncomfortable silence. Uncle James sensed the tension immediately, his expression shifting from friendly to concerned. "Is everything all right? Where's the investment fund I trusted you with?" he asked, directly setting his briefcase on the coffee table. The room went completely still. Mom's face drained of all color, the reality of what she'd done finally sinking in as she realized this wasn't just family money she'd taken. I leaned close to Uncle James and whispered 3 words that changed everything. "She stole everything." Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed quickly by a controlled anger I'd rarely seen from him. Without a word, he pulled out his phone and dialed a number from memory. "Frank James Baker here. Remember that situation we discussed? I need your advice right away. Yes, it's urgent. The address." He glanced at me, and I nodded my permission. 428 Maple Street, Allentown. 20 minutes perfect. He ended the call and turned to face my mother, who had sunk onto the sofa, her hands trembling. "Margaret," he said, his voice eerily calm, "perhaps you'd like to explain what Samuel means." Mom looked desperately around the room as if seeking an ally, but found none. Kevin sat hunched in an armchair, looking like he might be sick. Aunt Lydia and Uncle Paul watched in bewildered silence. "It was a family emergency," Mom finally said, her voice small. "Kevin was in trouble. I did what any mother would do." "By stealing $40,000 that didn't belong to your son in the first place?" Uncle James asked incredulously. "What do you mean, didn't belong to him?" Mom's confusion seemed genuine. "Samuel was holding that money as custodian of an investment fund. My investment fund." Uncle James's voice was deadly quiet. "We signed legal documents. The money wasn't his to give or yours to take." The implications hit Mom like a physical blow. But, I thought it was Samuel's savings," she stammered. 15,000 of it was," I clarified. "The other 40,000 belonged to Uncle James and his business partners." Kevin made a strangled sound from his corner. "Mom, you told me it was your money. You said you'd been saving it for emergencies." Mom shot him a warning look. "Kevin, please?" "No, I want to know what's going on," Kevin insisted, showing an unexpected backbone. "If that money wasn't yours to take, then what have you gotten us into?" Uncle James sat down, placing his folded hands on his knees. "Let me explain the legal situation," he said, addressing the entire room. "Samuel signed documents making him custodian of funds belonging to Baker Investment Group, my company. Those documents included his fiduciary responsibility and liability." He turned to my mother. "Margaret, by taking that money without authorization, you've committed several serious crimes: theft wire, fraud, since the money crossed state lines when Samuel brought it here from Philadelphia, and potentially conspiracy if Kevin was aware of where the money came from." "I didn't know," Kevin protested. "I swear I didn't." Nevertheless, Uncle James continued, "The severity is compounded by the amount taken. Over $40,000 makes this grand theft a felony in Pennsylvania." Mom's face had gone from white to gray. "But it was to save Kevin's life," she whispered. "Those men he owed money to. They threatened him." "Then you should have called the police," Uncle James replied without sympathy. "Or a lawyer. Or even me. There were a dozen legal options available that didn't involve stealing." "What happens now?" Aunt Lydia asked quietly, the first time she'd spoken since the revelation. My business partner Frank is a retired judge, Uncle James explained. He's bringing 2 police officers to take formal statements. Given the amount involved and the circumstances, this will likely result in criminal charges. Criminal charges, Mom echoed, her voice breaking. James, please. We're family. Family doesn't steal from family, he replied, echoing the very words she had used to justify her actions to me earlier. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Kevin suddenly stood up, his face contorted with emotion. It's my fault, he blurted out. All of it. I got into gambling debts. I told Mom I was in danger, but I never asked her to steal anything. I thought she was using her own money. He turned to me, tears streaming down his face. Sam, I'm sorry. I never wanted this to happen. But the money's gone. I gave it to Marco this afternoon. All 40,000. Marco, Uncle James inquired sharply. My. Bookmaker Kevin admitted, staring at the floor. He works for some people in Atlantic City. They gave me 30 days to come up with the rest of what I owe. Uncle James exchanged a significant look with me. Atlantic City meant crossing state lines, which potentially brought federal charges into the picture. Mom seemed to shrink further into the sofa with each new revelation. I was just trying to protect my son, she whispered. By sacrificing your other son? I asked quietly. Before she could respond, headlights once again swept across the living room windows. 2 vehicles pulled into the driveway, an expensive sedan and a police cruiser. That would be Frank, and the officers, Uncle James said, standing to answer the door. Mom buried her face in her hands, while Kevin stood frozen in the middle of the room, looking like a man facing a firing squad. Aunt Lydia moved to sit beside Mom, placing a comforting arm around her shoulders, despite her obvious disappointment. Uncle Paul excused himself to the kitchen, muttering about needing something stronger than beer. As Uncle James went to the door, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. There was vindication, certainly, but also sadness that it had come to this. Despite everything, these people were my family. The satisfaction of seeing them face consequences was tainted by the knowledge that this night would permanently alter our relationships. The front door opened, and footsteps approached the living room. The moment of reckoning had arrived, and there was no going back. The living room fell silent as Uncle James returned with 3 men, Frank Burton, his business partner, and a retired judge with an imposing presence, and 2 uniformed police officers who positioned themselves near the doorway, observing the scene with professional detachment. Frank Burton surveyed the room with sharp eyes that had presided over countless cases during his judicial career. James has briefed me on the situation, he said, without preamble. Officers Porter and Ramirez are here to take statements and assess whether immediate arrests are warranted. My mother made a small wounded sound. Kevin looked like he might pass out. I stepped forward. Before we proceed, I'd like to request a few minutes alone with my uncle Judge Burton and the officers. Officer Porter, the older of the 2 policemen, looked to Frank for guidance. After a moment's consideration, Frank nodded. We can use the dining room. Samuel, my mother pleaded, reaching out, please don't do this. I simply turned and led the men into the dining room, closing the pocket doors behind us for privacy. Once seated at the table where our family had shared countless meals, I took a deep breath. I understand the seriousness of what's happened, but I'd like to propose an alternative to immediate arrests. Frank leaned back in his chair, skeptical but willing to listen. The amount involved constitutes a felony, Mr. Baker. Your mother admitted to the theft in front of witnesses. The law is quite clear. I'm not disputing that laws were broken, I acknowledged. But prosecution isn't always the only path to justice. Uncle James watched me carefully. What are you suggesting, Samuel? A legally binding agreement for full restitution with significant collateral to ensure compliance, I explained. My mother owns this house outright. It's worth at least $300,000. She can sign it over as security for the debt with strict conditions and oversight of both her and Kevin's finances going forward. Frank looked thoughtful. That's an unusual approach for a case of this magnitude. These are unusual circumstances, I countered. My brother has a gambling addiction that needs professional treatment. Criminal charges won't solve that problem. They might even make it worse by removing any chance for him to earn legitimate income to repay his debts. Officer Porter spoke up. What about these alleged threats against your brother? We should be investigating that as well. I agree completely, I said. Kevin needs to provide all information about his bookmaker and these Atlantic City connections. That's non-negotiable. Uncle James studied me with an expression I couldn't quite read. You've thought this through. I have, I confirmed. I'm not suggesting we sweep this under the rug. There need to be serious consequences. But I believe we can structure those consequences in a way that has a better chance of creating actual change rather than just punishment. Your professional reputation allows you some latitude here, Frank acknowledged. The victim, in this case James, and his investment group has significant influence over how we proceed. Uncle James nodded slowly. Frank, could you and the officers give me a moment with my nephew? Once we were alone, Uncle James fixed me with a penetrating gaze. You surprise me, Samuel. After what they did, I expected you to want the book thrown at them. Believe me, part of me does, I admitted. But what would that accomplish? Mom would have a criminal record that would make future employment nearly impossible. Kevin would likely end up in prison, where he'd learn nothing except how to be a better criminal. And your $40,000 would still be gone. It's not about the money, Uncle James said quietly. It's about the breach of trust. I know, and they need to understand the gravity of that breach. But I think that can happen without destroying what's left of our family. He was silent for a long moment. Your father would be proud of how you're handling this. Those words meant more to me than he could know. Does that mean you'll consider my proposal? I'll support whatever course of action you think best, he said finally. But there must be real consequences, not just promises that will be broken at the first opportunity. Agreed. No more enabling. No more rescuing. They need to face reality, maybe for the first time. We called Frank and the officers back in and outlined my proposal. After some discussion of legal details, they agreed that we could proceed with a civil solution, provided Kevin cooperated fully with their investigation into his gambling connections, and both he and my mother signed legally binding agreements. When we returned to the living room, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Mom sat rigid on the sofa while Kevin paced by the window. They both froze when we entered. Samuel has proposed an alternative to immediate arrests, Frank announced. We're willing to pursue a civil resolution with significant conditions. The relief on their faces quickly faded as I outlined those conditions. You want me to sign over the house? Mom asked aghast. But this is my home, your father and I. The house will serve as collateral, I interrupted, to ensure you repay what was stolen. You can continue living here as long as you comply with the repayment plan and other conditions. What other conditions? Kevin asked warily. Complete financial transparency for both of you. Addiction treatment for you, Kevin. Cooperation with the police investigation into your gambling connections. Regular accountability meetings. And most importantly, an acknowledgement of what actually happened here. What do you mean? Mom asked. I mean no more denial, no more justifications, no more rewriting family history to make your actions seem noble. My voice remained steady, but I could feel the emotion behind my words. What you did wasn't helping family. It was theft, manipulation, and a profound betrayal of trust. Mom flinched as if I'd slapped her. For years, I continued, you've enabled Kevin's worst behaviors, while telling yourself you were being a good mother. You've created a narrative where I'm the selfish one for establishing boundaries, while Kevin is the victim who deserves endless chances without consequences. That ends tonight. Kevin sank into a chair, his face in his hands. He's right, Mom, he said, his voice muffled. You always clean up my messes, and I just make bigger ones. It has to stop. Mom looked between us, her worldview visibly crumbling. For the first time, I saw a flicker of genuine understanding in her eyes. I never meant to hurt you, Samuel, she said softly. I truly believed I was doing what was best for our family. I know I replied, some of the hardness leaving my voice. That's what makes this so difficult. Your intentions weren't malicious, but your actions were deeply harmful. She nodded slowly, tears filling her eyes. What happens now? Now we sign papers that make all of this official, Frank said, opening his briefcase. And then the real work begins. For the next 2 hours, we drafted and signed agreements. Mom put up the house as collateral for the full $55,000 plus interest. Kevin signed a separate agreement committing to addiction treatment and financial oversight. Uncle James, as representative of the investment fund, accepted the terms for restitution. The officers took detailed statements about Kevin's gambling debts and his bookmaker information that would feed into an ongoing investigation of illegal gambling operations in the region. By midnight, the legal framework was in place. The officers and Frank departed, leaving our family to face the emotional aftermath of the evening. Mom approached me hesitantly as I prepared to leave. "I'm sorry, Samuel," she said, and for the first time in my adult life, I believed she truly meant it. "I never saw how my actions affected you. I was so focused on protecting Kevin that I didn't protect you at all." "I didn't need protection," I told her. "I needed respect." She nodded, understanding, finally dawning. "I hope someday you can forgive me." "This isn't about forgiveness right now," I said honestly. "It's about change. Real lasting change in how this family functions." As I drove back to my hotel that night, exhaustion settled over me. The confrontation had been necessary, even cathartic, but it marked only the beginning of a long and difficult journey for our family. Whether my mother and brother could truly change remained to be seen, but for the first time in years, I felt a glimmer of hope that it might be possible. The following weeks unfolded with a series of structured changes that fundamentally altered our family dynamics. 3 days after the confrontation, I returned to Allentown with a lawyer to formalize the agreements we'd outlined that night. Mom sat at the dining room table, hands folded tightly, as my attorney explained each document in detail. The house deed transfer was first. The property would be held in trust until the full amount was repaid, with Mom retaining living rights as long as she complied with all conditions. "This seems so formal," she murmured, pen hovering over the signature line. "It needs to be," I replied, without apology. Informal family arrangements clearly didn't work for us. She signed with a shaky hand, officially putting her most significant asset on the line. The house represented not just financial security, but her last tangible connection to my father and the life they'd built together. The repayment plan came next: $500 monthly from her teacher's aide salary, plus any extra income she could generate. At that rate, it would take years to repay the debt, but the house collateral ensured I could recover the funds if payments stopped. Kevin's agreement was more comprehensive. He sat across from us 2 days sober, and already showing the jittery signs of withdrawal from the gambling habit that had consumed his life. "I'll be monitoring all your financial accounts," the lawyer explained. "Any unusual transactions will trigger immediate review. Your paycheck will be directly deposited with automatic transfers for approved expenses and debt repayment." Kevin nodded, his usual defensiveness nowhere in sight. "What about the gambling treatment program?" "You start next Monday," I informed him. 3 nights a week, plus weekend sessions for the first month. The program director already has your information." "How am I supposed to pay for that?" he asked. Not belligerently, but with genuine concern. "It's covered as part of our agreement," I explained. "Consider it an investment in making sure this situation never happens again." The most difficult part came next: finding Kevin legitimate employment. His sporadic work history and lack of specialized skills made him unappealing to most employers, especially with the current economic downturn. Uncle James surprised me by offering a solution. "We need someone at the office for basic maintenance and courier work," he said during our weekly meeting. "The pay isn't great, but it's steady, and we can keep an eye on him." "Are you sure?" I asked. "After what happened?" "Your father believed everyone deserves a chance to earn redemption," he replied. "Not be given it freely, but to earn it through consistent effort. Besides, Kevin will be handling mail and fixing printers, not managing investments." Kevin started the following week at Baker Investment Group, working directly under the office manager, who had strict instructions to report any concerning behavior. To everyone's surprise, especially mine, he took to the structured environment. For perhaps the first time in his adult life, clear expectations were set, and consistent consequences, both positive and negative, followed his actions. Meanwhile, Mom began her own challenging journey. Her first session with the family counselor I'd arranged didn't go well. She says I have enabling patterns and boundary issues. Mom complained during our weekly check-in phone call, as if loving my child too much is some kind of pathology. "It's not about loving too much," I countered. "It's about how that love is expressed. Dad loved us completely, but he still let us face consequences." The mention of Dad still had the power to quiet her protests. I suppose he did, she admitted reluctantly. As weeks turned to months, subtle changes emerged. Mom stopped making excuses for Kevin's past behaviors. She began attending Parents of Addicts support meetings, where she found community with others who had made similar mistakes in the name of protection. One evening in early March, about 3 months after the incident, she called me with an unexpected request. "I found a box of your father's old financial records in the attic," she said. "I was thinking, maybe you could teach me how to better manage my money, the way your father used to." It was the first time she'd acknowledged that Dad's financial discipline had been a strength worth emulating rather than an inconvenience to be worked around. Small as it was, this represented significant growth. Kevin's transformation was more visible. The structure of regular employment addiction treatment and financial oversight provided the framework he'd lacked for years. His counselor reported consistent attendance and genuine participation in the gambling recovery program. "It's like I've been living in a fog," Kevin told me during one of our now regular brother lunches. "Every problem looked like something that could be solved by one big win, you know. Just one lucky break, and everything would be fixed." And now, I prompted. "Now I see that's the addiction talking. There's no magical solution, just small steps every day." The practical implementation of our agreement wasn't without challenges. Mom struggled to adjust her spending habits accumulated during years of financial chaos. The first month, she overdrew her checking account, buying unnecessary gifts for a cousin's baby shower. "This isn't working, Samuel," she protested when I questioned the expenditure. "I can't live like a prisoner in my own home." "It's not about restriction," I explained patiently. "It's about priorities. Right now, repaying your debt needs to be a higher priority than buying expensive baby clothes." Kevin faced his own setbacks. 6 weeks into his recovery, he stopped at a convenience store that had video poker machines. He didn't play, but the temptation shook him badly enough that he called his sponsor immediately afterward. "I almost threw it all away for a $5 bet," he admitted during our next meeting. "That's how powerful this thing is." Uncle James remained skeptical, but acknowledged their efforts. "Actions matter more than words," he reminded me frequently. "Let's see if these changes stick when the pressure eases." His caution was justified. Too often in the past, Mom and Kevin had made short-term improvements when crisis loomed, only to revert to old patterns once the immediate pressure lifted. This time needed to be different. To ensure lasting change, I insisted on including long-term accountability in our agreements. Even after the debt was fully repaid, Kevin would maintain financial transparency for an additional 3 years. Mom would continue working with her financial counselor to build healthier money management habits. One unexpected bright spot emerged from the Atlantic City connection. The information Kevin provided about his bookmaker proved valuable to an ongoing federal investigation into organized crime's gambling operations. Though Kevin wasn't completely absolved of his participation, his cooperation earned him consideration that helped avoid potential criminal charges. 4 months after that fateful night, we gathered again in Mom's living room, the same space where everything had unraveled. This time the atmosphere was different. Uncle James had agreed to a formal review of our progress, a milestone in rebuilding trust. "The repayment plan is on schedule," he noted, reviewing the documentation. Kevin's supervisors report satisfactory job performance. The addiction counselor confirms consistent attendance and participation. Mom sat straighter, a tentative pride replacing her usual defensiveness. "We've been working very hard." "Yes," Uncle James agreed, "you have. But this is a marathon, not a sprint. The real test will come with time." As we concluded the meeting, Mom surprised everyone by addressing Uncle James directly. "I want to thank you for giving us this chance," she said, meeting his eyes steadily. "I know you could have pursued criminal charges. The fact that you didn't says more about your character than my actions said about mine." Uncle James, never one for emotional displays, simply nodded. But I caught the slight softening in his expression, the first indication that perhaps someday trust might be rebuilt. As spring turned to summer, our new family dynamics continued to evolve. The rigid formality of our early agreements gradually gave way to more natural interactions, though the accountability structures remained firmly in place. For the first time in my adult life, I began to feel like part of a family system that was, if not healthy, at least moving in that direction. The path ahead remained long and uncertain, but we had taken the crucial first steps. 6 months after discovering my empty safe, I stood in my new apartment in Baltimore, unpacking the last of my boxes. The move had been both practical and symbolic, a career advancement opportunity that also created healthy distance from Allentown and its complicated memories. The modern high-rise overlooking the harbor couldn't have been more different from my childhood home. Floor-to-ceiling windows filled the space with light, and the minimalist furniture reflected my preference for simplicity and order. Here there were no faded photographs reminding me of what had been lost, no worn carpet bearing the imprints of past arguments, just clean lines and new beginnings. My phone rang Mom's weekly check-in call, now a regular Sunday evening ritual. "The place is finally coming together," I told her after we exchanged greetings. "You should see the view of the harbor at sunset." I'd like that she replied, a hint of hesitation in her voice. "Maybe when I've made a few more payments I could visit. If you're comfortable with that." Of course. 6 months ago, she would have either assumed her welcome or avoided the visit entirely. This tentative request acknowledging my boundaries represented real growth. "I'd like that too," I said, surprised to realize I meant it. Our conversations remained somewhat awkward, neither of us fully certain how to relate without the dysfunctional patterns that had defined our relationship for so long. But the honesty was refreshing, even when uncomfortable. Mom had continued her therapy, working through the issues that had led her to enable Kevin's destructive behaviors for so many years. "My counselor says I used Kevin's problems as a way to feel needed after your father died," she shared during one particularly vulnerable call. "I never realized I was actually making things worse." These insights came with visible changes. She'd started volunteering at a community center, finding healthier ways to nurture others without overstepping boundaries. She'd also returned to college part-time, working toward completing the education degree she'd abandoned when she married Dad at 21. Kevin's transformation was perhaps the most remarkable. Now 8 months sober from gambling, he had received his first promotion at Uncle James's firm, moving from maintenance to an entry-level administrative position. His addiction counselor had reduced his sessions to twice monthly, citing consistent progress in developing healthier coping mechanisms. "The strangest thing Kevin told me during one of our now monthly brother dinners is realizing how much energy I spent chasing that next bet. Now I have all this. I don't know mental space for other things." He'd started taking night classes in business administration. Nothing prestigious, just the community college downtown. But he attended regularly and maintained passing grades. For someone who had never completed anything more demanding than a video game, this represented significant progress. "Do you think you'll ever completely trust us again?" he asked me one evening, the question hanging between us like a physical presence. "Trust isn't binary," I replied after careful consideration. "It's not all or nothing. Right now I trust you both to honor the agreements we've made, because there are consequences if you don't. Real trust, the kind that doesn't need oversight or verification that takes years to rebuild." He nodded, accepting this hard truth without the defensiveness that would have characterized his old response. "I'm in this for the long haul, Sam. One day at a time, like they say in the program." Uncle James remained the most cautious among us, which was understandable. Though he'd been impressed by Kevin's work ethic and Mom's consistent payments, he maintained professional distance in his dealings with them both. "Your brother shows promise," he acknowledged during our monthly investment review. "But promise isn't performance. Let's see where he stands in another year." My own professional recovery had been challenging, but ultimately successful. The lost investment funds had been a significant setback, but not a catastrophic one. I'd worked overtime for months rebuilding my client base and reputation. The move to Baltimore came with a partnership offer at a larger firm, a step up that might have been delayed by years without the intense effort I'd put into recovering from the financial loss. "You turned adversity into opportunity," Uncle James observed when I accepted the new position. "Just like your father would have done." That comparison meant everything to me. Dad had faced his own setbacks, layoffs during economic downturns, health challenges that drained our savings, but always emerged stronger, never compromising his principles along the way. The most valuable lessons from this ordeal weren't financial, but relational. I learned that boundaries aren't selfish, they're essential for healthy relationships. I discovered that helping someone sometimes means allowing them to face the natural consequences of their actions. Most importantly, I recognized that forgiveness doesn't require forgetting or immediate restoration of trust. My relationship with Mom would never be what I'd wished for as a child, but it had evolved into something more honest than before. We'd stopped pretending. She no longer cast me as the selfish son who abandoned family obligations, and I no longer viewed her as merely Kevin's enabler. We were complex individuals with flaws and strengths trying to build something healthier than what had come before. Kevin and I would likely never be the close brothers that some siblings become, but we'd found a tentative respect that hadn't existed previously. His journey through addiction recovery had given him insights into his own behavior that made meaningful connection possible for perhaps the first time in our adult lives. 1 year after the incident, we gathered at Uncle James's lake house for a small ceremony, marking Kevin's first full year of gambling sobriety and the repayment of 20% of the stolen funds. It wasn't a celebration exactly. The harm done couldn't be erased by milestones, but an acknowledgement of progress made. As we sat on the deck watching the sunset paint the lake in gold and crimson, Uncle James raised his glass of sparkling water in deference to Kevin's recovery. To accountability, he said simply. We all drank to that. Accountability, the willingness to own one's actions and their consequences, had become the foundation upon which we were slowly rebuilding our family relationships. Later that evening, as Mom and Kevin washed dishes in the kitchen, Uncle James joined me on the dock. Your father would be proud of how you've handled all this, he said, his voice gruff with uncharacteristic emotion. Not just the financial recovery, but the way you've balanced consequences with compassion. I learned from the best, I replied, thinking of both him and my father. As I drive back to Baltimore the next day, I reflected on the journey of the past year. The theft had been a violation of trust that cut deeply, but the aftermath had forced changes that might never have happened otherwise. Kevin might have continued his destructive gambling until it killed him. Mom might have enabled him right into an early grave. Our family might have maintained its dysfunction indefinitely, wounds festering beneath a veneer of normalcy. Instead, we faced our reality head-on. The process was painful, messy, and ongoing, but also necessary and ultimately healing. I now understand that true family bonds aren't built on blind loyalty or unlimited second chances. They're strengthened through honest accountability, clear boundaries, and the courage to have difficult conversations. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do for someone is to stop protecting them from the consequences of their choices. So, I ask you, what boundaries have you struggled to maintain with loved ones? Have you ever had to choose between enabling someone and allowing them to face necessary consequences? Drop a comment below sharing your experience. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to support more content exploring these complex family dynamics. Share this video with someone who might need permission to set healthier boundaries in their own relationships. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, sometimes true healing can only begin when we stop avoiding difficult truths.